Have you ever heard a story that you just can't forget? For me, it was about 3 years ago at a local gym when I first heard Bill tell his story, and I have remembered it ever since. Bill has a complex medical history that has meant over 100 hospital visits starting at the age of 17 months. Can you imagine being enrolled into your kindergarten class and then, along with your dad, training your soon to be teachers ways to support your medical needs in class? I'm so glad that Bill generously shares his story with you here today. I'm your host, Danette Adams, and this is the Resilient and Resourced podcast. So I'm really happy that finally Bill and I have been able to make this conversation work. We've been working a long time at this. I'm really excited to have Bill to tell his story here today. I think it was about 2.5 or 3 years ago, Bill, where I heard you tell your story at a local gym, a place where we have a mutual friend. And I have not forgotten it. It's been that long, all the way through COVID and everything else. When I decided to start a podcast last year, I knew you were one of the first people that I wanted to speak with because your story was so memorable. It just stuck with me. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
No, absolutely. I honestly, I've done a few podcasts now, and this is really, I've never had someone see me speak in person. Especially that long ago. You were one of the first groups of people I spoke in front of, and I was very nervous, as I still am. But it's really special to me that you remembered that, and then not only remembered, but have now asked me to come speak to you again. So thank you for having me on.
That's great. So let's just start right in, dig right in, and start telling your story.
Sure. So I was born with a genetic high cholesterol condition that I was diagnosed with at 17 months old. So I got a central line at that time and started going to Sick Kids Hospital once every 2 weeks for a treatment called plasmapheresis, which basically just removes the cholesterol from the body. And over my childhood, I went every 2 weeks to Sick Kids for that treatment. And then for my 8th birthday, I ended up having a triple bypass. So I was one of the youngest kids in North America, if not the youngest, I think, at that time to have a triple bypass. And, obviously that was a pretty big deal. And we increased my treatment frequency at that time to once a week. So continued to Sick Kids every week with my dad. The next year I got whooping cough and I was hospitalized for 5 weeks at that time. And they found another condition called superior vena cava syndrome, which basically that was formed from my central lines blocking or scarring my superior vena cava closed. So I don't have any circulation through my subclavians and a lot of my upper body since then, but that in itself, has caused me some issues over the years. But it's not a great thing to have, especially as a kid. So, but anyways, I kind of got that diagnosed, carried on. In my teenage years, I had 3 fistula surgeries. So basically, because my central lines were causing some issues, I needed another method of treatment access to get the cholesterol out of me. So I still have a fistula in my left upper arm. So at 19 years old, I got my central line taken out. And kind of over those years, I started lifting weights, got into the gym, lost a bunch of weight. I was a little bit overweight as a kid. I had a lot of limitations physically in that I was on blood thinners, and these central lines can be kind of temperamental and get pulled out and things like that. But yeah, in my 20s, I would say, deep into the gym and powerlifting, and competed in powerlifting a few times. Ended up deadlifting 545 pounds, which was a pretty big feat for me. When I was 19, I was told I shouldn't lift more than 50 pounds. And, about a decade later, it was a little bit more than that. So that was pretty cool for me. But, and then for my 32nd birthday, there a couple of years ago, or before that, I guess, I found out I was in heart failure, and my aortic valve was basically almost completely shut. So I had a lot of issues getting blood, to my body, and then my superior vena cava syndrome kind of exacerbated that. And in 2019 in May, I ended up going in for another open heart surgery, where I had a Bentall procedure done, which replaces the ascending aorta, aortic root, aortic valve. And I had a mitral valve replacement and a 4th bypass graft. So that was kind of its own bag of worms. It was another pretty big deal. It wasn't a really positive potential going into that surgery. So, here I am. So it's worked out fairly well. But recovered from that, and then so basically right before I started speaking, that was kind of one of the catalysts to really motivate me to get out and kind of share more. And then I had a major tissue infection in my chest, around my heart, and in my arm, and I was in the ICU for 2 weeks and almost died from that again too. So um, that was probably, I would say, mentally the hardest time I've ever experienced. That kind of stretch there, but for most of my life, I've never once doubted that I was just gonna continue living. I've never thought, whatever this is going on is gonna kill me. But that infection really, it was the first time in my life I wasn't confident that my body could take what I was experiencing. I didn't necessarily think that I was going to die, but I have a lot of physical health problems, and it was a pretty rough time. But anyway, got through that and kind of fast forward, and here I am. So it's kind of in a nutshell the last 35 years.
Wow. I have so many questions. I'm not sure exactly where to start, but I'll start with current time right now, and how your health is now, and what has COVID looked like for you?
I mean, honestly, COVID, it's odd to say, but the last year and a half, my life has been probably the best it's been in the better half of a decade. For a bunch of years there, my health was not stable. It wasn't great, and really since spring 20, well, yeah, around spring 2020, my health has been good. Last year I felt the best I've felt in years, and despite everything happening in the world, like I've had a good couple of years. I feel good, and I think that that's a very unique experience for the last year. Like, other than the inconveniences obviously of COVID, I've been fortunate that I haven't been strongly affected by it in my day to day, and I felt healthy. I started a new drug last fall, and I'm going to London now once a month. So for the first time in my life, I'm going once a month instead of once a week, and that's been just, I can't even describe the difference that's made, just having that time back. My London days or Toronto days were always a whole day. So I have more life now.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. So let's jump back a couple decades then.
Sure.
To going to the hospital once a week from 17 months.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, that's all you knew. You didn't know anything but living in and out of a hospital. Did you realize that growing up? Like, did you feel different?
Like a little bit. I don't remember it ever being like a large impediment or anything like that. It was, I couldn't play sports, as I said, with the central line. There's some risk involved there, and I was on blood thinners. But like I knew I was a little unique in that, like, no one else in Teeswater had a central line. So like my father and I, we went to train all the teachers in the public school what a central line was and how to do first aid for a central line. And then even down to the firefighters, we went to the fire hall and had to train them what to deal with it. Like, if I was around town and something happened, like, what do you do? So I was the only kid that did that. But I started fishing at a young age. My dad's a huge outdoorsman, so I just did different things. So I don't remember ever feeling like I was missing out in playing sports or swimming. Like, I imagine swimming like would have been a bit, but I made sandcastles. Like, we still went and did stuff. It just, I didn't go in the water. So I caught a lot of frogs. I caught crayfish in the rivers, that kind of stuff. But it wasn't like this big sense of loss, as you say. It was just all I knew. And people over the years, they kind of seem to think that, it's this huge undertaking to go to the hospital once a week. And, I don't know how you do that, and you miss a day of school your whole life, this whole thing. But like, to me, it's just always been, I have to do this to stay alive. Like, that's one thing that I do in order to get to live. And I just think it's a different kind of framing than most people expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of that framing would be, too, that you have a view of the hospital that other people would never have. A view of people who spend a lot of time in the hospital like you.
Absolutely. There's, especially, I think from a young age, I saw a lot of people don't get to go home. And every week, I get to go in, I'm there for a few hours, and then I get to leave. So it's kind of this, maybe it isn't the best way to spend a day, but as I said, especially as an adult now, like I see a lot of people with autoimmune conditions and, just different things where transplants and that type of thing. And, some of those people end up doing quite well and some of them definitely don't. So, I don't know. I've been exposed to that my whole life, and I think it's kind of kept my head in, I don't know, on my shoulders, so to speak. And I think I am very fortunate for that. A lot of people are scared in the hospital, and rightfully so. And not to say I haven't been too at times, but it's very comfortable for me. I sleep in hospital beds quite well, and I don't know. Nurses, to me, I've got such a respect for the profession and just how they handle things. It's unreal. So I've been so fortunate to have the medical staff around me. Just it's unbelievable.
Yeah, what a great resource. You did talk about one time when things you weren't as positive, because you come across to me anytime when I've seen you speak and when we've spoken that you're very positive without being, sort of toxically positive where it's just fake positivity. It's just, you just feel as comfortable that things are going to be okay. Mm-hmm. But you talked about a time where you didn't quite feel that way. So during that time, what did you lean on then? What resources did you have? People or your own determination? What came to your support at that time, or what did you reach out for?
Well, I ended up seeing, so when I was in heart failure, I started into counseling, just through the medical staff, whatever. It was one provided by the county kind of thing. And that was moderately helpful at the time, but I was fortunate in that when I called them, like I had already had a history with them. So I got to go in, and actually I had a session of EMDR therapy. And that was after the fact. Like my nervous system was all jacked up and I was sleeping like an hour. And things got pretty rough, and I was reliving a lot of things. And anyway, I had this session. It allowed me to sleep, and I'm fortunate in that I have a fairly close relationship with a lot of my doctors. And I started on a medication to help me sleep at that time. And it's just, my body was falling apart, and I wasn't allowing myself to go to sleep. And definitely having easy access to doctors, it's one benefit of being me. Like I've got the personal phone number for a couple of them, and it's wow. Kind of like, it's a neat kind of situation. But that counseling was really the one thing that made a big difference in that. But up until that point, I was pretty solitary on my own. I don't know, when things kind of hit the fan, I do tend to push people out of my life. I don't like to. I find a lot of the times I feel the need to try to explain how I feel to people, because they ask and they can see that something's wrong. But oftentimes I don't have that energy, and I don't want to take the energy to tell other people what's going on. And I think that that's something a lot of times people have a hard time accepting. And so in that case, I just kind of don't. I'm not saying that's the greatest reaction, but honestly, a lot of my life now is energy allocation and just kind of acknowledging what's going on, and like kind of what do I have available to me internally today, and how am I going to use that. So some days that includes other people, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Energy allocation is an exceptional boundary setting tool, so that you just know what you have to give, and that you set that boundary. That's all you have to give that day, kind of thing. So
mm-hmm. It hasn't been perfect, I'll say that much, but it's something I'm working on all the time.
Yeah. So I have a question about how you talked a little bit about lifting weights, and I would like to know what that means to you, what it meant to you when you started doing it, what it means to you now.
Now I'm very grateful that my body is still able to do what it can. It's one thing I speak about when I do. It's kind of this sense of I can versus I can't, and there's a lot of exercises that I'm unable to do now. So it's really just been a neat sort of exercise in finding things that I can do and what else am I capable of doing. So to me, my lymphatic system has some issues now, so lifting weights literally helps me feel better in that it helps move fluid through my body, which otherwise settles and causes infection, and that's a whole road I don't want to go down again. So in that sense, it's not only is it a physical benefit, and the mental as well, but that's a big part of it now. But when I started, I don't really, I imagine for one thing, it was a control. Like it's something that I knew no matter what, like the results are up to me. So if I don't progress, that's on me. If I do progress, then that's also on me. And I think that that's something, having chronic health issues my whole life, they're somewhat outside of my control, but things like nutrition, things like activity, and obviously I didn't know that at the time, but, as you get into it, you realize like maybe intuitively I just knew like things that I can do in order to set myself up for the best potential future. I just started doing them, and it's there's nothing like a good pump. So for anybody that likes to go to the gym, that feeling itself, like those endorphins and the dopamine and all that, like I've definitely at times used that as a crutch to kind of step through some hard things. But I think that that's been definitely a resource for me. That's been a tool I've used a lot over the years, some in healthy ways, some in not so healthy ways, but I figure it's better than a lot of the alternatives. And at the end of the day, more muscle mass or at least a little bit less fat mass is definitely good for someone with heart issues and high cholesterol. So
Yeah, that's cool. The one thing I remember from your talk, like many years ago now, when I was walking home and I was with my partner, I just turned to him and said, Bill would never have not needed people. So I was thinking about you starting at such a young age in the hospital. You always had to rely on other people as resources. And I guess sort of what made me think about that is so many of us have a choice. We have a choice, well, am I going to reach out to somebody? And so I guess what I'm thinking about now is when you were a child, you didn't really have a choice. When you now have a choice to reach out, do you feel that now that you have control, say with the weightlifting, that you're more able to say, now I have the choice to reach out for this resource? Where do you land on that and resources now?
A hypocrite. A lot of the time, and so in 2019 when I had that chest infection, I've always been very fortunate, like my whole life, as you said, I've had a lot of people around me to support me and be there for me. And what I realized at that time is, everyone wants to help. And when everyone does everything they can do to help and nothing helps, you feel the most helpless you ever can. So, I don't know, a lot of the times now for me, I like to have, we'll say I'll keep that resource in my back pocket, because then mentally for me, if I don't reach out for help, theoretically I have a group of people that will always be willing to help me. But I don't necessarily know if they can or not, right? There's not always something you can do, and that in itself is something that I would rather, I feel pretty comfortable with that whole concept now, but over the years, I think that's where I've kind of focused my energy is most of the things, like nobody can breathe for me. Nobody can help me get out of bed and help me stand on my own 2 feet. Like these are like the baseline things to being alive that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you've got 100 people in your house, like you have to breathe on your own. So, and I do find in those situations, like when there's people around me and I'm in a situation where I'm just trying to breathe, I feel stressed because it's like, well, all these people around and they're trying to help and they can't. And, it's this whole situation of I kind of take responsibility for their helplessness feeling. And it's just something that I try to avoid. So I don't promote that. Like I definitely would rather people reach out for help because I don't believe most people have the mentality I do. It's just different life experiences. And I feel very comfortable not doing certain things or doing certain things that maybe a lot of people don't. So I think it's just really knowing, where our strengths are, where your comfort zone is. And it seems like mine's just a little bit different than a lot of people. So I do reach out for help, or at least for conversation, like something, especially with COVID, I find I'm very much a in-person kind of person. And I don't know that all or nothing is kind of the way to go, but if I don't have a conversation and, face to face with somebody, a phone call just isn't the same for me. So a lot of the times I just have the conversation with myself.
Yeah. So speaking of strengths, what are some of your strengths? What are some qualities about yourself that you have grown to appreciate through your life?
Yeah, as my ability to smile is something that I definitely admire about myself. And just how many times it's been tested and say proven, but it's just kind of deeply ingrained in me. I just, as a quick story, like when I woke up after my last heart surgery, or going into that surgery, I was pretty concerned about my temperament when I woke up. Like I didn't know if I'd be aggressive or, because general anesthetic is kind of a mixed bag. But all of the nurses I had at that time complimented my parents on, like, your son is so polite. Like my body was essentially numb. I was on oxygen, and like I was in really rough shape, and like I was hardly awake or alive. And I was saying thank you so much, and I really appreciate what you're doing for me. And these types of things, just I wasn't even there, and that's the kind of responses I was having, and that to me, it's priceless about my character. And when I heard about that afterwards, I just thought, like, I damn near cried. It's kind of like, well, what do you? There's no way you know that about yourself without it being tested and shown. And that to me it's a real accomplishment that I didn't really have a lot of control over, but through a lot of the hardest things that I've been through, I don't really look for things to smile about. I just end up smiling, and I don't think it's all like a defense mechanism or anything. It's just, there's always something, like when I woke up, I was in rough shape, and my mom said it went well. So that's great. And I went back to sleep. Everything's all good. We'll see what happens later. It's not a matter of, oh my God, I can't feel my body. It was like, yeah, okay, thanks. I'll see you later. And that's one thing that it's definitely carried me a long way. And I think that's one part of me that's, allowed me to stay as healthy as I have been.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I know for the listeners, you can't see Bill's face like I can on the screen right now, but he has a huge smile, and talking about even difficult things, you have this way of looking at things that is grounded and quite unique. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know what else you can do. As you say, energy allocation, the more you dwell on things, the more tired you get. And sometimes just being more tired isn't an option you really want to explore, so
right. So if you had somebody in front of you who was, let's say they were struggling either with their health issues, or maybe kind of like a dark night of the soul thing where they're like before your surgery, where you're feeling things weren't quite as manageable as they had always been, what would you say to somebody like that?
It's hard, it's because you never know how someone is going to respond or what they might respond to the most positively. But one thing that I find beneficial, and is often beneficial for the people I talk to, is the person that you're going to be, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and the growth potential you're going to have along that way is, you can't explain that to someone, but to me it's so exciting. Like, the person I was before my heart surgery versus after, the person I was, this infection and after, like, is exponential change in the man that I am today because of those things. And like, I don't know what someone else is going to be like in 6 months. Like, it definitely can go the other way. But to me, it's such an opportunity to see what you're capable of and like who you're able to become. You can test your character, you can test, and then it's confidence too. Like, when you experience something that's particularly hard, like, in my experiences in the physical realm, but mentally as well, like, you develop this sense of, for me, it's confidence. A lot of times I think resilience is the word that's more common, but which is very appropriate, obviously, for this podcast. So yeah, for me, it's just framing that as who are you going to be in whatever amount of time. This, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I love that. I love that combination that you've put together there with the energy allocation. So setting your own boundaries, knowing yourself, but almost like preparing the future you. So like the Hugh you're going to become tomorrow. The way your character and your physical body has been tested is preparing for future Bill. And the things
Right.
that I do today are going to be preparing my, setting a groundwork for future Danette.
Because it
So
makes a
that is
difference,
yeah,
It really does.
yeah,
And it's a lot of people,
yeah,
especially later in life or not early in life, where you have a health scare of some kind, there's this huge shift in things and this a sense of change and potential loss. You have these years to develop patterns and, habits, and then all of a sudden some of those can't happen anymore. And it's a hard thing to do, but that adaptability to me, well, I guess when you asked me to come on the podcast, I really thought for a bit, what is resilience to me? And one of the first words that came to mind was adaptability. And that to me, like, I've never I've never thought of resilience along the way. It's always been kind of in hindsight of things. Like, I just know that I am resilient in that I have all these things that prove it. But on the backside of that, resilience isn't all a positive word for me either. There's a lot of pain associated to it. Uh, isolation, fragility, all these things, like definitely discomfort. And I don't know if that's necessarily talked about, but that in itself, again, like that's what leads to the strength, and that's what leads to the sense of durability and growth and overcoming and confidence. So to me, it's kind of that you got to have one to get the other, and it's definitely kind of a double-edged sword. But I like them both. I really do. It's just one is maybe less fun to talk about.
yeah. And I totally agree. The word resilience definitely is not always about comfort.
Mm.
The trees that don't break, they just bend in the wind. They're being really resilient, but that's not going to be very comfortable if, they had
For
feelings like
sure.
we kind of had feelings, sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
absolutely agree that sometimes resilience is not an easy word to take on. But I appreciate that you're able to talk about the hard things. And that's one reason I started this podcast, was so that people could hear stories like yours, where it's not just focusing on the positive, but looking back, you saw that you were resilient as you were laying the groundwork for future Bill, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, like I
yeah,
said, it's I get a lot of joy in just the reactions I've had from people after hearing me speak and different things like that. Like, it's priceless to me, and it's somewhat of a selfish endeavor. I know that I have felt very isolated and alone multiple times over my life, and I have always had a huge support system. So I can only imagine, like, people who don't feel that they don't have a support system around them, how that might feel. And just to have someone stand in front of you and say, you know what, here's some things that I've experienced, and wherever their mind goes, it just seems to be, you know, a positive experience to hear about mine. And it's special to me that I can just talk about my life and somehow that ends up helping other people. But, you know, people like you, and like, you're doing great things, and I really appreciate being part of it.
awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your willingness to talk about things that aren't always easy to talk about, but to do it with to face the tests of your physical body and your character again and again with such determination, and then the willingness to share your story. I just so appreciate you taking this time.
Well, thank you very much. No, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, great. Take care, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Danette.